Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this timely discussion on African domestic collaboration. We've just heard from the Chancellor and the Dean and His Excellency, the Governor of Katsina State as well. The need for Africa to grow now more than ever, do so sustainably, but also do that at a very fast pace. Today we will talk about the Africa Free Trade Agreement and how the Africa Trade Agreement can help Africa harness its economic potential. We'll look at the nexus between border security, trade stability, and how climate can help shape the future of African economies. But before we start, I would love to introduce you to our distinguished panelists today. And you've heard from the governor just now. Again, thank you very much for sponsoring the Africa Business Alliance as a business forum as a gold sponsor. Our panelists today bring wealth of expertise, both in trade policy, financial markets, and governance. Starting with Dr. Dikko. Dr. Dikko is currently the executive governor of Katsina State, Nigeria. As he said, Katsina State is bordering Niger Republic. And the significance of this is the Africa Free Trade Agreement is dependent on regional blocs. And one of those regional blocs is ECOWAS, which is the West African regional bloc. Katsina State is bordering a country that has just decided to leave ECOWAS. So this is significant in how it affects the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. Dr. Dikko also has a lot of experience in policy implementation as well as trade facilitation in northern Nigeria. Before he stayed here as a governor, he served as the Director General of the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDEN, where he played a pivotal role in promoting SMS, small and medium enterprises. To be very fair, it was very difficult to go after the Chancellor and the Dean. That was an incredible session. So, where he fostered the growth of small and medium enterprises. He has extensive experience in security governance, particularly in border regions, which we've just talked about. But he also has a PhD in agricultural extension and rural sociology from Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Thank you for joining us today, Your Excellency. Next on the panel, we have Ms. Ote. If you're at the business school, you would be very familiar with Ms. Ote and her incredible track record. She's an officer of the Order of the Niger and has been an executive in residence at Side Business School since January 2019. Her area of research focuses on capital markets, economic development, and financial technology. She also advises the university in areas of Africa entrepreneurship, finance, and sustainability, and most recently co-chaired the Schools Anti-Racism Initiative. Ms. Ote was previously a treasurer of the World Bank and Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commissions in Nigeria. She was also the group vice president and group treasurer of the African Development Bank. She's an incredible woman. Give her a round of applause. She has received numerous awards, and I've just told you one of them, which is the OON. And recently, she was also nominated by Forbes Africa as one of the most influential women in Africa. Next, we have Dr. Sena Afu-Daitutu. Correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you. Dr. Sena is a legal scholar whose research interests range from public international law to security sector reform, data governance, and gender studies. She's currently a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana. Hopefully we get to, it wouldn't take us 800 years to get to, okay, so just wanted to check that. And she's currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University Law School. Thank you very much for joining us today. So let me indulge you a little bit. Why is this discussion, why is this crucial? I can see there are a lot of Africans in the room. So can you remember how many times you picked a product and it said made in an African country versus made in China? I don't know, the proportion is probably 1 to 100, right? And it's not a coincidence. 1/5 of all raw materials out of sub-Saharan Africa, at the very least, are exported to China. But on the other hand, the most countries that export to sub-Saharan Africa is China. So why are we not adding value to our products? Why is intra-African trade not happening? Let me give you some numbers on that. So currently, intra-African trade stands at just 15%. In comparison, we've just heard about the European Union, which stands at 68%, as well as Asia, which stands at 59%. So in order to resolve this, Africa thought, you know what, the African Union, alongside a couple of African countries, came together and decided to establish the Africa Free Trade Agreement in 2018, with 55 member countries participating. Now, we know the Africa Trade Agreement is new, and it comes with a lot of challenges, especially in a region that is burdened by border security, as well as climate-induced conflict. And our panelists today will help us dissect all of this, including the need for investment, the need for capital markets to regional capital markets, as well as the need for border security to enhance the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So let me start with you, Ms. Ote, because capital markets and funding are essential to developing Africa's trade expansion. How do you think strong and well-regulated capital markets, such as regional stock exchanges, which we currently do not have, cross-border listings, and financial integration can support the success of the Africa Free Trade Agreement?
I know we have only a few minutes, and I do want to start by commending you as co-chair and your colleagues in the Oxford Business Alliance for such an amazing program that you've put together and a great start. And I think they do deserve a round of applause. I also want to say that one of the things that has been amazing for me, having been here for the last 6 years, is really the way that the business school considers Africa. And the dean, in his opening remarks, talked about it, that Africa is a powerhouse, and in my own words, where if you understand it, you can actually benefit from all the opportunities, rather than somewhere where you go to help people. And that's something that's kept me affiliated to the business school for the last 6 years. On your question, I will just summarize it to mean, the value of capital markets more generally. So if you look at the needs in Africa, huge. So the African Development Bank says we need $130 to $170 billion just for infrastructure. FSD Africa, I sit on their board, they say that if you add SMEs, if you add housing and other areas, it's about $300 billion. And the current infrastructure deficits, according to the World Bank, essentially they say we're losing GDP by 2% just because of the infrastructure deficit. So if you just take what's going on in infrastructure, energy, just breaks my heart because Africa can, if it's fossil fuel, it's got it. If it's solar, it's got it. If it's hydrocarbons, it's got it. But 600 million Africans do not have electricity. And what will be game-changing is to provide resources that can help address the multitude of concerns. And there are opportunities, in my view, they're not challenges. And what capital markets do is that they transfer resources from those who want to make more money on their resources to those who need it so that they can build societies. So one of the reasons I like this question that you posed to me is that it will be game-changing if we look at capital markets from a more regional point of view. And there are a few regional exchanges. The BRVM in Cote d'Ivoire is a regional exchange and has benefited from the CFA zone. But I think what we're looking at is much bigger, which is why you're probably talking about it. In Africa, we have $2 trillion at least of institutional capital, and I'm excluding the monies from banks. If you add that, it's $2.8 trillion. And that can grow in the next 15 years to about $6.4 trillion. A lot of that money is invested in US treasuries, in German treasuries that don't make very much money for those investing in them. So if we've got the kinds of capital markets that you're thinking about, we will be in a position where people can invest, they can make money, and we can solve the problems that you see. So integration is absolutely critical. Integration in capital markets is absolutely critical. The stock exchanges are doing something. They have the linkage project that's funded by the African Development Bank. But if some of the markets are so small and fragmented that what integration does is bring them together. And you talked about cross-listing and others. But I just wanted to say that as a highlight. It's absolutely essential. I think if we're going to make progress on solving some of the problems, and if people are going to make money, I'm not in that group that says, oh, come and help us. Africa's got a lot to offer. We need systems that help people be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's what capital markets do. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. No, thank you very much, Ms. Otte. So if you're an investor in this room and you haven't looked at Africa, that is an incredibly big reason for you to look at Africa. I mean, talking about the Africa Free Trade Agreement again, it's been described as, a game changer, the biggest free trade zone literally in the world, right? But we know that from sort of a trade policy perspective, there's still a lot of things that need to be done. So Dr. Sena, I just wanted to pick you up on this. What are the key barriers that are preventing African nations from fully utilizing the Africa Free Trade Agreement?
Okay. So to answer your question, you're talking about the barriers that prevent African countries from benefiting from the AFCFTA. The teacher in me will ask a question. What are the benefits of the AFCFTA? If the AFCFTA is to work, we're going to have job creation all around. There's going to be integration. There's going to be economic resilience. Regional value chain to be strengthened. Bigger markets, more bargaining capacity. And the regional income will be boosted by at least $450 billion by 2035. Who doesn't like this? This sounds like everybody's dream. But why are we not jumping onto the train? There are two main factors. I'll call them the hard factors and the soft ones. The hard ones, I'm sure all of you can give me answers if I were to ask you. First, infrastructure. Africa is the second biggest continent in the world, or on Earth, is how we put it. When you look at the map of the world, Africa is a very small, you draw it, it's small. It's bigger than the other continents that we see, apart from Asia. We need roads to connect, from down south all the way up north. We need rail, because when we make goods, we produce, it has to move. You want to go from South Africa to where? Madagascar? It has to move. We need air transport. We need bridges. And like Ms. Otte said, it requires billions of dollars. And, I don't want us to look at it as something that's impossible, because if we do, then everybody sits back and nobody wants to take the step. But apart from the fact that we need this infrastructure, hard roads, rail, electricity, like the Lord Chancellor said, you can't put the whole of Africa into one box, because you can't compare South Africa to Gambia. You can't compare Niger to Nigeria. No. So some countries are stronger than others in terms of infrastructure, but infrastructure is the biggest problem. The African Union is doing amazing. They have a PIDU where they're building infrastructure. The African Development Bank is also doing a lot. They have a project of funding roads all across the continent. The second thing that I'll classify as a hard factor is our fragmented markets. I mean, Nigeria has how many billion? Billion, yes? The population of Nigeria is...
No, we're not.
220 million. I thought you were a billion. Well, compared to Gambia, which has 2 million people, Nigeria would be like billions, right? Nigeria has 220 million people. Gambia has 2 million at most. Liberia has 1 point something million. So the fragmented markets don't help. Because when it comes to negotiation, Gambia in China won't stand a chance. But if we put all the markets together, 55 countries, okay, Eritrea is the only country that has not signed on to the AFCFTA. That's 54. We will be able to negotiate better and bigger deals for our populace, right? Then, political instability. I mean, we take the content. These days it's not so bad. At the moment, it's just Congo. And yeah, Congo is the only place. Sudan, yes, Sudan and Congo. But a few years ago, it was Liberia, it was Senegal, it was Ivory Coast. So we have those problems. Then, currency and payment issues. Naira, CD, Dalasi, CFA. You know, there's so many currencies all across the continent. So that also doesn't help. Those are the hard factors. And then, of course, limited industrialization and the product and what we produce. You know, you made the point about the fact that we export, intra-Africa is what, 15%?
15.
15, yes. My question is, what are we producing? I'm Ghanaian, I'm from Ghana. Cocoa? Not even chocolate, cocoa. Gold. In the raw form. If we were to open up our markets and we're selling raw cocoa, who are we selling raw cocoa to? Nigeria? South Africa? We need to process it. You know, I was coming this morning, I was having a conversation with someone. He says, we've been having this conversation since I was in high school 40 years ago. We know what to do. We need to process our goods. I'm sure you studied, for those of you who studied in one African country or the other, you know all the answers, you know everything I'm saying. So why is it not happening? And I think it goes back to what was said earlier, leadership. I mean, some of you are young. I don't think I'm old, but I'm sure some of you are younger than I am. So the thing is, you will come and face, until something is done, the same problems you're facing. It's about leadership, sustained, maintained leadership. So we've decided that this is what we want to do. So let's go at it and let's not stop. The soft factors, I'll just quickly run through, are the trade barriers. And then one thing that is all over, which will be a big impediment to the AFCFTA, is, I don't want to say corruption, because corruption is used, lack of awareness. Most of the goods are going to go through the borders, right? And for those of you who are on, social media, etc., there have been horror stories of people driving from, say, one African country to the other. The African Union has beautiful rules. ECOWAS has beautiful rules. You get to the border, there's some immigration person who has decided that if you don't give them $400, you're not going. And that's it. So until we deal with those issues and have governance in those small spaces, AFCFTA, which is beautiful, sounds amazing, will look great on paper, but to realize it, if we don't change those things, it won't happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sena. Thank you. Well, Nigeria is getting a lot of shots today. We got so many shots fired. Thank you. No, it's okay, we love you. We know you're from Ghana, but it's okay. But let's talk a little bit about the reality. So we've been talking about implementing Africa Free Trade Agreement, and I would love to ask His Excellency, Katsina State is a border town, and I think by now there should have been some sort of engagement when it comes to implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. How have you been engaged as a state when it comes to on-ground implementation of the Africa Free Trade Agreement? What challenges are you experiencing when it comes to supporting businesses, for example, that are in Katsina State to harness the Africa Free Trade Agreement, if at all you've gotten there? If you haven't gotten there, where is the conversation?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think this is a very important conversation that has to do with reality, because I'm speaking at the point of reality on what exists between the border communities within the African countries. In fact, there has been a very robust informal transaction within our borders. That is a reality, because if you go, you see people moving around with their goods and services from Niger to Nigeria and what have you. and which has no any formality. There are some people who moves around without coming across the border points. They have their own way of coming in. And then there is a village in Katsina State, I speak to you today. Half of it is Niger, half of it is Nigeria. And those who lead those villages are the same father, same mother. So you can hardly differentiate who is a Nigerian, who is a Nigerian. So this is the kind of relationship that exists between us in Africa. And that relationship has already been there. But as she rightly mentioned when she started to mention about the barriers that create a lot of issues bordering on movements of goods and services, I think the whole idea of African Free Trade Zone is single market. To have a single market in Africa that can give access to economic growth, trade, stability, security, and what have you. Because if you look at the security situation in Africa, especially at the Sahel, you see that the security cross over from border to border. In Borno State, you see that Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria, there are so many issues. Then there has to be a kind of security collaboration to address that issue at the moment. And so also there is this collaboration between Nigerian security and the Nigerian security. And the issues that has cropped up recently about the exit of the Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali has really heightened the tension of insecurity within that region, which also temper the economic and trade issues that exist within the borders. I think we need to have, what we require at this moment, Africa, is leadership. We need to have leaders who are focused, leaders who look after issues that affect Africa, and also who are after the growth on economy of this Africa, because countries does not mean they have to do things alone. You know, there are certain things that you have to put in place. Some countries have comparative and competitive advantage over the other. So we may not say, if we say, okay, Nigeria is going to focus more because of the advantage it has on mineral resources, that does not mean it's the same thing that Ghana must do. So I think we need to collaborate more. We need to provide leadership at the highest level that will create and reduce the barriers that exist and hinder the growth of economy and hinder the growth and potentials of our people. Because they have said it rightly, Africa has an advantage of human and natural resources. But what have we done to harness those resources that we have? We have the highest unemployment. Why should we have unemployment in Africa when we have all these natural resources that we can put into production? It's unfortunate that you can come to UK in a supermarket, you see some products which are Nigerian products, but packaged here, branded here, and then call another name, which is very unfortunate. But we need to know, we need to add value to whatever we produce. Adding value to what we produce will enhance our economic growth and potential. And I think these are the way that we need to go about it in Africa. With that, we can be able to say, yes, we are Africans, and we can decide, and we can also take advantage of the technology and innovation that exists throughout the world so that we can harness our potentials.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. For full disclosure, I'm also from Obode town. I don't know if I belong to Niger or Nigeria, but yeah, I come from Obode. And I just wanted to pick a little bit on the informal trade that you talked about and how Katsina State is suffering from massive insecurity, which I think hopefully that is a little better now. And one of the factors that was mentioned is the inability to control the borders in terms of security between Katsina State and Niger. And you've also talked about leaders, which, you know, we're incredibly grateful to have you here today as a governor of a state. So what strategies are being implemented in a way to actually help with this border security issues? That's one. But secondly, how are you as a state also working to try and add value to a lot of the resources, natural resources that Katsina State in itself has?
I think it's very important you pose this question because, you know, most of the border issues, regulations, does not lie with the state government. It lies with the federal government. So the state government are only intermediaries within which to make life better for our people. But essentially, most of the regulations come through the federal system between a country and another country. So subnationals does not really have very much take on how issues should be at the border control. But as you rightly mentioned, we try to engage the states neighboring us from the Niger Republic. That engagement has really helped to smoothen some gray areas that exist between our businesses. And that has also smoothened the relationship between the two countries. Even at this point, that Nigeria and Niger, they are at a loggerhead, but this subnational, myself and the state neighboring us from Niger Republic, we still relate, we still call each other on phone, we still discuss issues that affect us. There is no way you can just separate those two things from one another. And that has also negatively impacted on our people in terms of insecurity, because it is at the border that small arms are being smuggled in and out, and which are being used by these bandits or criminals to create harms to the people. But at that collaboration between the state and the neighboring states or subnationals, we are doing a lot of things, a lot of collaboration to see how we can mitigate the movement of these arms from one country to another or from one state to another. And also even in terms of helping us to arrest some criminals that may cross over the border to ensure that. So such synergy exists and is still existing, and we are really cashing on it to address some of these security and economic issues that affect our people.
Let's talk a little bit about climate change and climate-induced insecurity. And there is a lot of people on one side of an argument that have said, well, developed countries have benefited from massive industrialization. Africa is producing the least emissions. So why should we care about climate change when we're not producing the most? And maybe this is our time to industrialize. So I would like to pose this question to you, Ms. Otte, in terms of the role of sustainable finance and climate-smart investment in the long-term development of a continent.
By the way, I also have a disclosure to make. I grew up in Kano, and in the 70s and early 80s, we used to actually go on holiday, my parents and I, to Niger. And so the issues of our security are foundational. And I'm glad that the governor and his calling on the Niger side are really paying attention to these issues, because some of these borders are artificial borders. And I think we need to go beyond the borders, and I hope that the AFCFTA will help us. So on sustainable finance, absolutely important. As I said, when you asked the question about capital markets, if you want fossil fuels, Africa is there. If you want hydro, Africa is there. I mean, Inga Dam in DRC can basically power the entire continent. If you want solar and renewables more generally, Africa can be at the forefront. So for me, we don't have that false dichotomy on the continent as to whether we should focus on fossil fuels or focus on gas or whatever alternative sources. In fact, some of the most important projects, which will also address the security issues, are projects like the Desert to Power project that the African Development Bank has been leading, which basically cuts across 11 countries in the Sahel, going from Senegal to Sudan. And that project, if achieved, will help 250 million of the poorest people in the world have access to electricity. And I believe electricity is foundational, because your children can go to school, you can run a business, you can get better health care, and all of that. And so I actually do believe that sustainable finance is actually very, very, very good for Africa. And that's why I say there's no dichotomy. We're also wealthy in resources, and we're wealthy in fossil fuels, so that's fine too. But I think more generally that sustainable finance is the way to go for us on the continent.
As we try to round up the question and allow time, round up the session and allow time for questions, I would just like to ask Dr. Sena if you can add a little bit to this on how the AFCFTA is currently trying to integrate climate adaptation policies into the free trade agreement.
Okay, I'll speak to that, but give me 30 seconds just to address something on security. You know, I think that Africa is made up of different regional groupings. We have the ECOWAS, SADC, AES, that's Niger, Mali, and Burkina, who've just left ECOWAS. We have COMESA, we have different groupings. And when it comes to security, all these groupings have ways of dealing with security issues. So the AFCFTA can, in addressing issues of security, you know, lean on these to help address all these border security issues. And security, we're talking about violent extremism, human trafficking, thievery, you know, narcotics and firearms and all that. And I also think that the problem, unfortunately, in some of the African countries is that of governance. In most, not all of the African countries, the whole nation is found in the capital city. Out of the capital city, there is no control. And that's where the problems begin. Because if you take a country like Mali, Mali is vast, really huge. So a lot of the activity goes on in the capital, which is Bamako. When you leave, because there are not enough people to, you know, guard all those places. So what happens is that it allows, and like the governor said, and like Ms. Otte also said, the borders are artificial. Somebody living in Burkina is related to somebody living in Ghana. It's family, it was just, you know, somebody just, so there are lots of informal borders that allow people to move. I digress, let me answer my question on climate change. And yes, we don't have a lot of time, yes. So if you look at the AFCFTA, it promotes green trade standards and regulations. It allows for the creation of harmonized environmental standards across all the countries. It also allows for the integration of climate resilient trade infrastructure, and it also makes space for what? Financial mechanisms for climate adaptation. So the AFCFTA on its own is a beautiful document, like every other thing we do in our part of the world. The documents are beautiful, the policies are amazing. Implementation is the problem. And I would say that implementation depends on leadership. We need strong, resolute, committed leaders like Mr. Nelson Mandela, who will not give up after 5 years, because it is hard. And one thing I'll say is that change is difficult. It's very easy to get into the status quo and keep as is. You know, we are sitting here, we are students, we are all gung-ho, yes, we want to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, you're like, oh, and the minister gets 20 cars and sirens and green, and then you go and you become the minister, and you get all this, and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's not so bad. And that's what happens, because when we're not there, we want to, you know, say, let's change, and then we come and we don't want to. So it is my hope that whoever our leaders are, myself, yourself, when we get there, we take the necessary steps to bring about the change we desire. The AU says the Africa we want by 2063, and the Africa we want is an Africa with electricity, free trade, educated people, young, educated girls, boys, and a beautiful continent that everybody wants to come to. Thank you.
Just to get some closing remarks from His Excellency, we're told by a lot of people that climate change is too far away from the people that are in the grassroots or far from reality. When we hear climate change, we just hear buzzwords, right? But we also know that Africa is suffering a lot from the impact of climate change. Food insecurity is worsening. People that are employed by agriculture no longer have jobs to do. And just as closing remarks, Your Excellency, I just want you to help tell the people here in the room how climate change is affecting, is excavating security issues in your state, but also how climate change is affecting agriculture. very briefly as closing remarks before we ask questions.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, you know, agriculture is a mainstay of the people of my state. About 90% of the population are engaged in agricultural value chain. So focus need to be paid on how to make sure that we become climate resilient in our approach. For example, we know we have potentials, a lot of potentials in irrigation facilities. So what we do now to our smallholders farmers is providing them with pumping machine that has a solar energy attached to it, which provide a lot of support to our farmers. And also, we are also engaging some companies and investors to make sure that we have hydropower solution to most of the dams we have. Mini hydro solution to those problems, creating 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt in most of our big dams that can create 1,000 hectare irrigation facility in a place can go a long way in helping our farmers and as well as being climate resilient in whatever we do. So these are the kind of engagements that we are making to ensure that, because major effect of climate change is on food security. And once we don't address that issue, we continue to have problem. We'll continue to have even problem with the pattern of rain that happens because of temperature, different temperature and different climate zones that we have within our, and then resilience, creating seeds that can be able to resist the heat that is within our area. So there are a lot of things that the subnationals, state like mine, that they need to focus more on climate resilience, agriculture, and smart agriculture, so that we can be able to have better income for our people, better employment opportunity, and to also fight poverty that exists within us. Thank you. Thank you.
End of your session. Thank you so much for your insightful remarks. Thank you.